Language is one of my favorite chapters, chapter 10. It tends to have less research quoted in it than some of the other chapters that we've had, which is kind of nice. Sometimes the amount of information in the chapters with respect to number of articles referenced is a little overwhelming. But if we were going to define language, we'd have to speak of some bottom-up and top-down perspectives. You remember bottom-up is this idea that there are properties of things that are processed no matter what, and they don't really need any interpretation. One of those things was geons from an earlier chapter that had to do with shapes. And then there's some top-down perspectives on language that have to do with us making wholes of things, WHOLES. For instance, the Paris in the spring triangle from way back in February, I guess it was. So language is not the same as communication. Communication does not always include language. If you think of bees and other animals, birds, that have the capacity to signal things to other organisms, to let them know of danger or food or what have you. That's not the same as language because that's a basic rote mechanism that can only be interpreted in one way. Language involves a grammar, which is actually a noun here, that's a little different than what we think of it as. It's a regular, productive, it is regular and productive, and there is some arbitrariness, and there are some discrete aspects. So a grammar is just a set of rules for producing language, and the suggestion is that you could always produce something new from it. It's generative in that case. So I could come up with something new in the year 2017 that said, hey, I just bought Bitcoin. That may have, at that point, been a sentence that had never been uttered, but nonetheless, that's one of the things that grammar affords us. Now, there is some arbitrariness. For those of you that may have taken German, as I understand, in German they say, be careful, this is a plate hot, where the adjective follows the noun. In English, of course, we say hot plate. Now, that's arbitrary. Neither is absolutely correct, but we've arrived at an understanding of the way English will be expressed as the German people have arrived at their understanding. Now, there are some finery points even in that, but when we say grammar, we're not necessarily talking about good grammar, correct speech, not saying ain't, etc. We're speaking more broadly of our set of rules. Interestingly, when we're speaking of language, you may have seen this passage. I happen to have a connection with this researcher, Savage Rumbaugh, up in Iowa. Her chimpanzees use symbols to communicate, but even they are arguably, let me fix that word there, short of language. They have a wide array of symbols. I'm going to read this passage here. This is, here it is. Some investigators, here it is. Most agree that chimpanzees can be taught to use symbols or signs to make requests or label objects. For instance, me more eat or orange juice, etc. A study by Sue Savage Rumbaugh up there at the Great Ape Trust in Iowa suggests that pygmy chimpanzees can even learn to spontaneously use symbols. Learn to use symbols simply by watching other chimps, etc. Despite these impressive findings, most researchers would agree that substantial differences exist between the language that people use and these chimps. Most would agree that although chimpanzees can acquire many vocabulary items and some rudimentary structure, their communication system will always fall short of any known human language, and we'll have to get into the structure to know why that is. We'll speak of a few aspects of that here in a second.